If you can make the global economy 5% more efficient, that's $3.5 trillion of value. Think of space as the massive, massive data play, and more satellites were launched in the last 12 months than the entire history of the world. We have reliable, inexpensive launch to orbit. That completely changes the game.
Welcome to Inspired. I'm Alexa Von Tobel. Did you know that in 2030, the International Space Station is retiring and will be dropped in the South Pacific Ocean? Today, I was fortunate enough to speak with the person building what comes next, Dylan Taylor, Chairman and CEO of Voyager Technologies, a $1.2 billion publicly traded company. Voyager works across defense, protecting us from hypersonic threats, space solutions, building satellite and data infrastructure, and commercial space stations. In 2019, they won the NASA contract to build Starlab, the replacement for the International Space Station. In this conversation, Dylan takes us from watching Star Trek as a kid in Idaho all the way to building the future of humanity beyond Earth. We connect over our shared experience as Henry Crown Fellows, and he walks me through what it was actually like to be the 606th human to reach space aboard Blue Origin. He also gives us a sneak peek of how he built Voyager and the wild projects they're working on. And what struck me most was Dylan's vision for why space isn't an industry. It's our 8th continent. We're living through one of the biggest space booms in human history, and Dylan is giving us a front row seat. Let's dive in. If you're running a startup, we know things like managing equity and communicating with investors are always top of mind. Carta has built a connected suite of tools that over 40,000 companies use to do just that. Their platform of software and services helps you lay the groundwork so you can focus on building. To learn more or get started, visit carta.com. And with that, let's welcome Dylan. Dylan, first of all, I'm so excited to have you on here today.
Great to be with you.
I'm a girl who grew up obsessed with outer space. I grew up in Florida. We watched many of the launches. I would get woken up by my parents, and we'd go lay in the grass and watch different shooting stars and very interesting astronomical events. And so just very, very happy to get to meet you. I want to start from the beginning, Dylan. So you grew up in Idaho, and I would love I always like to ask this question because I'm sitting here as a parent of 3 wonderful children. If you look back at your childhood and to everything that you've accomplished today, having gone to outer space and built a publicly traded company in the space category, what from your childhood feels like it makes a lot of sense to connecting the dots to where you are today? Tell us the story.
Wow. Fascinating question. Well, I would start at the very beginning. So how did I get interested in space, maybe? And that really, for me, I know it's a bit of a cliche, Alexa, but it was Star Trek. And the reason I was so captivated by Star Trek, and I remember vividly watching this with my dad when I was 3 years old, literally, we were living in a pretty rough situation. My parents got married really young. My mom was 19, my dad was 20. He got shipped off to Vietnam right around that time. And so he ended up coming back from that, was in graduate school, and we were literally living in a house next to a group of a biker gang, basically. I'm not even joking about that. And so what I was really fascinated by was when I watched Star Trek, I mean, not only did you have a new adventure every week and a new planet to explore, and which really captivated my sense of adventure, but it was also a scarcity world, if I can use that term. Everyone had enough stuff. Everyone was getting along. It was very diverse. And I was kind of comparing that to what I was living in and going through. And I thought to myself, there's a big disconnect here between this show and my reality. And so I was always captivated by space, its adventure, but probably more fundamentally, its ability to sort of allow us to reimagine what humanity can be. And I've always thought of it as a blank canvas. I've always thought of it as the best of humans. I know you know a couple of astronauts personally, Alexa. These are some of the best humans that walk the face of the earth. They're not only talented, but they're humble, they're collaborative. So I've always been captivated by how fascinating space can be and how it brings out the best in humanity.
Let's go to your early career. What do you think was the single most important trait that you had that was essential to you founding Voyager? And then tell us, what is Voyager in your own words?
Sure. Honestly, Alexa, I think it was just ambition, just ambition and hard work. I was super, super, super driven from a young age, and actually probably to a fault. I think we're both Henry Crown fellows. So
I was
I
going to
think,
connect the dots on that. Yep.
yeah. And so for me, Henry Crown came at a great time because, the whole moniker is from success to significance. And I was feeling successful in quotes, but honestly, pretty miserable. I was in industries I didn't care about. I was working with people I didn't necessarily like or respect. And I was not, in my mind, playing small ball, not doing the best work I could do. It wasn't terribly purposeful. I was, thinking, what's my impact on the world, right? And of course, in Henry Crown, you're asked to reflect on all these questions. And so for me, as we talked about, my passion had always been space. And so I took my skill set from running public companies and other industries, and I thought, okay, well, we know we need to create a company. And here's the way I would frame Voyager. The companies in aerospace and defense, I'll loop that in a little bit as well, but the companies in aerospace and defense that have the most capability have no ambition to do great projects. And the companies that have the ambition to do great projects don't have the capability. And I thought to myself, could we create a company that's assembling enough capability that you could build the replacement to the International Space Station, which we have the privilege of working on that project called Starlab. And projects like that go to the moon, build infrastructure that allows people to live and work in space, but do that in a fun, entrepreneurial, innovative way. And so that's really what Voyager is. We were founded 6 years ago now. And, we're working on some super cool projects, including we're involved in Golden Dome. We are building a replacement to the International Space Station. So it's an exciting time for us. And as you alluded to, we went public back in June of this year.
Dylan, first of all, thank you so much. And just to kind of get to the chase, you're currently running a company that you founded that is call it $1.2 billion, and I'm sure more today. Even so, very, very successful on every single level. Um, you just said a few things that I'm fascinated by, which is that in the middle of helping be part of the plan and project to replace this current space station. Can we just double click on that, just as one of the interesting things you said? What goes into that? That's wild. And what's Voyager's role in helping make that happen?
Yeah. Well, believe it or not, 20 months after we were founded, we weren't even 2 years old. We won one of the three contracts awarded, what's called commercial LEO destinations, which is the commercialization that NASA is going through. So very similar to what they did with the space shuttle, right? They sunsetted that. And they basically said, we're not going to own and operate our own rockets any longer. We're going to put that out for bid. We're going to see what's available in the commercial markets. And of course, that gave birth to SpaceX and
Yep.
Rocket Lab and other companies. So very similar on the space station side, the International Space Station, which is one of the greatest things humans have ever done, in my view, right, deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. It's old. It's been up there for 25 plus years. And the plan is to have that come down in 2030, 2031, something like that. So it's going to be decommissioned. They're going to drop it into the Pacific, South Pacific Ocean. Sadly, that's what its fate's going to be, because it's too big to burn up in the atmosphere, and you can't really disassemble it. So that's what is going to happen to the ISS. So you have to have these commercial replacements online prior to then. Our project is called Starlab. It's focused on the research and development aspect. A lot of people don't realize microgravity, which is the environment you're in on the space station, that's why people float around, is really a magic laboratory. You can grow perfect crystals. You can do biopharma drug development you can't do here on Earth. You can grow essentially perfect semiconductors. So there's a lot of R&D that can happen in microgravity, and we're optimizing our space station to do that. And we brought in partners from around the world on the project, Airbus, Mitsubishi, Palantir. Those are the main partners on it. But even companies like Hilton Hotels are involved. Northrop Grumman. We just signed a partnership with a quantum computing company. So it's a pretty fascinating project.
That's incredible. Um, so you grew up watching uh, television about space, and now you're literally helping build the Star Lab, which is sort of a pinch me moment, I'm sure, to your little kid self. When you went to space, so actually in 2021, you flew aboard Blue Origin's New Shepard Mission 19, becoming the 606th human to ever go into outer space. Can you just like, for fun, because that's just such a wild thing to get to do. And you went through a different door because you were not a trained astronaut. So, one, what the heck made you do that? Because it's pretty exciting and terrifying thing to do. Two, what was it like? And walk us through that day.
Yeah, well, it was a life changer, Alexa, truly. So, lifelong dream to go to space. Never thought I would be able to go, right? I mean, it's like saying you want to be a Hall of Fame NFL quarterback, right? It's like one of those things that just seems too insane to even dream about. But had an opportunity. Blue Origin, of course, Jeff's company,
Yep.
put out basically the ability to compete in a lottery. You know, you had to pay, of course. I participated in that lottery. My strategy was novel, I thought. I didn't want to be the highest bidder, but I wanted to bid high enough to where I had their attention and I could be on a future space flight. The deal I had with my wife is that she said, look, if you want to go to space, let's wait at least until our daughters are out of high school before you do that. But I jumped the gun on that. I ended up going while they were in high school. And the reason for that was I think I was on flight 10, human space flight 10, which means I would not have even flown today because they haven't had 10 human space flights. But I kept on getting moved up in the manifest and ended up going on one of the very early flights. I was on the flight right after Jeff and his brother went. And I was on the flight, you might recall, with Michael Strahan, the daughter of Alan Shepard, who was the first human to orbit the Earth, or I'm sorry, first American to orbit the Earth. So that was sort of the context of it. I had founded a nonprofit called Space for Humanity. This was actually my Henry Crown venture. Alexa,
Oh,
you'll
that's
appreciate
incredible.
that.
Dylan, that context is amazing. That's so
Yeah,
cool.
exactly. So it all comes full circle. And of course, Space for Humanity was meant to democratize access to space. So we've sent the first Mexican-born female to space. We've sent the first Arab female to space. We sent Ed Dwight to space, who was the first African-American astronaut candidate picked by JFK. Did not go to space with NASA. In my opinion, he was discriminated against. And at age 92, we were able to send him up on Blue Origin and uh, co-sponsor his flight for that. So democratizing space was a passion of mine. And I think Blue Origin was looking for people to be on these early flights that were passionate about space, had a tie-in to why space matters. And so I think that's probably why they moved me up to flight 3. And yeah, the day, so first of all, you trained for about a week and a half on site there. And that our flight was actually delayed a couple of days due to weather. And I had a lot of friends texting me saying, I'm so sorry. You must be so disappointed. I'm telling them, I'm having the time of my life. This is like fantasy space camp, right? Because you're training, you're doing all these simulations, you're learning about the systems, you're meeting the designer of the spacecraft. So I really loved it. And day of the flight, you're up early. You meet with your friends and family at kind of a breakfast before you go out to the pad. Um, it was the best day of my life, and I have permission from my wife to say that. So it was really fantastic. And here's what's fascinating to me: people say, "Were you scared?"
I was about to ask that just to be clear. So, yeah, keep going.
Well, I thought, and I told people, I'm like, "Of course, I'm going to be terrified." Right? You get to T minus 10, and you've got to just be coming unglued. Like, how can you not be terrified? And the fact is I was not nervous at all, Alexa. Heart rate on launch was 56. And I don't think I'm a particularly brave person. In fact, the rest of the crew was also very chill. And I think it's because of the training, because you simulate that over and over and over again. There's a ritual where you walk across the jet bridge into the capsule and you ring a bell. We practiced that. We practiced every element over and over and over and over again. And so I think you kind of hack your brain where your brain's like, oh, I've done this before. And then honestly, the only thing I was nervous about was it getting scrubbed because we went into a delay where they were waiting for the winds to die down. I thought, oh, if they scrub this flight, maybe we don't go tomorrow and then maybe something happens and I don't get a chance to go. So that's all I was nervous about. And Yeah, it was just so fascinating. So T minus 10, you hit liftoff, and then you're pulling amazing. You're pulling 3.5 Gs on the way up, which, just to give you a sense, if you floor it in an F1 car, you're pulling about 1.8. So, this is a lot of Gs. You go supersonic in about, I think it's 27 seconds, you're supersonic. Um, I was actually watching the Earth fall away. I got special permission from Blue Origin to turn my head in the seat, which is apparently I'm the first person who ever asked that question. So I might have been the first person to ever see the Earth fall away. Because keep in mind, when you're in the space shuttle or the Crew Dragon, you're looking straight up. There is no window off to your right. The only architecture that has that is the Blue Origin capsule. And I think I'm the only Blue Origin commercial astronaut to have ever asked, can I turn my head in the seat? So that was amazing. I live in Denver. You're taking off from West Texas. So I saw the Rocky Mountains within 45 seconds. And then once you get up there, you unstrap. And I had a strategy. I've been thinking about this my whole life. My strategy was to go to the window, turn myself upside down. There's no up and down in microgravity, but because you've trained in the capsule, your brain intuits that that's up and that's down because that's what you know. But the way the Blue Origin windows are, they're kind of angled and sloped down so that when you go to the window and you're turned upside down, there's nothing in your field of view. Your seat's not in your field of view. So it's essentially like you're hovering over the Earth. If it's appropriate, I'll just tell you what I felt.
Yeah.
So imagine an emotion. It's got three parts to it. The first is you see the Earth from space, and it's this deep sense of stewardship, love, and affection, where everything you've ever known, every memory you've ever had, every person you've ever met, everyone you love is right there in front of you. It's almost like you're looking at a toddler or a puppy where you just have this unconditional love. But then that shifts to the second emotion, which is terror, because you realize how fragile of a state we're in. You see literally a whisper of an atmosphere. If you didn't know the word atmosphere, you wouldn't describe the Earth as having an atmosphere. It's like completely inconsequential in your field of view. Of course, it's consequential, although we wouldn't be here without it. But it's just a whisper. It's like a hint. Think of like the dew on a leaf in the morning, right? It's just like a touch, and you see compared to that this dark, hostile, black. I think William Shatner called it Black Death. And you just see this comparison. You think to yourself, that's what's protecting us from the cold hostility of space. And you're like, that can't be all there is protecting us. And then the third emotion is anger, because you feel like you've been whispered the password. And, because when you're up there, it's so clear there is no other people, there is no other place. There's here and us. That's it. Right? There is no other. There's only here. And so deep sense of love, terror, fear, anger, fuse those emotions together, multiply it by 1 billion, and then bury it so deep inside of your spirit that you can't unfeel it or unsee it for the rest of your life. And that's what it's like. It's a completely transcendental, profoundly impactful moment. And it's a perspective shifter. Frank White's written about the overview effect, a Rhodes Scholar, Harvard professor. That's a real thing. Every astronaut I've ever talked to, Alexa, and I know you know a few, they can be Russian, Korean, Japanese, American, fighter pilot, hardcore, artistic, atheist, Muslim, Christian, doesn't matter. Everyone has been impacted by that experience.
I'm remembering a quote that I heard Jeff Bezos say, which is, "You don't go to heaven when you die, you go to heaven when you're born," because you realize how tiny and fragile our planet is, and the fact that we get to do all the things we get to do with amazing people that we love. Um, and I just, first of all, thank you so much for sharing what it's like. I almost feel like I can imagine a tiny percentage of what that feeling may have felt like. You must fuel that feeling into everything you do at work now. Having founded Voyager and every day going to work on behalf of space and the future, does it let you take more risk? Does it let you, I mean, this whole podcast is about ambition.
Mm.
Um, and I sometimes worry we're not ambitious enough with the problems that we want to solve and how big we want to think. I don't think that applies to you here, Dylan, on any level, but did it shift your comfort with risk in any way?
It's a great question. I think two things. One is I felt like the world, and that's exactly why your podcast matters to the world. The world is playing small ball, right? We kind of go through the motions. We don't have the big ideas, and we don't take on the big challenges. Just full stop. We don't. And part of the reason I founded Space for Humanity was this whole notion that if people are dejected in a Henry Crown fellowship saying I can't impact the world, then maybe it's not anything other than we lack perspective, right? That's what really fascinated me by this notion of shifting people's perspective. So I think what it did for me were two things. One is you can't play small ball. So dialing up the ambition even more, but not personal ambition, ambition for the future of humanity, ambition for how we can do better as a species. And then the second thing is just a huge sense of urgency, feeling like I'm doing the right things, I'm on the right track, whether it's Space for Humanity, Voyager, Starlab, and just jumping out of bed in the morning saying, I'm just going to go get after it because this is really, really, really important work. And I think that's, if you, and it's been probably overused, but ikigai, I think is what the Japanese call it, but these concentric circles of what you're good at, what you're passionate about, what the world needs, and what the world will compensate you for. I think when you're operating in that overlap of those four concentric circles, you're really unstoppable in many ways. And because it's at the heart of passion, it's at the heart of effectiveness. So I think that's really what it did for me is it was very validating that I was on the right track, and it made me more ambitious but not, it's interesting. You being through Henry Crown, oh, actually, you'll get this completely. I had a mentor one time who said, Dylan, when your desire for reflected glory in the people you've mentored and impacted exceeds your desire for personal glory, then you'll be a true leader. That's what leadership is. And so I feel like that's more what I'm focused on now. And it's, by the way, it's way more satisfying than personal ambition, way more.
Way more. I'm only smiling because clearly you and I could be like brother and sister in the way that we think and are wired. And everybody listening, this fellowship that we went through, just so we stop talking about it without telling you about it. The Henry Crown Fellowship is this really beautiful thing. There's only about 400 and maybe 50 of us in the world.
Right.
And it's a program where you go and talk about humanity and what humanity needs and how to be a better steward, of being a better leader. And anyways, it sounds like it changed your life in some really important ways. It definitely changed mine,
Good.
um, in terms of how you think about being a leader. So I loved it. Um, I want to talk just a little bit about Voyager because, on every level, you're a successful businessman. You've raised $482 million. You took the company public. You co-founded the company in 2019. 2 years later, you went to outer space. Um, you took it public on the New York Stock Exchange. All of those things are like, again, check the box, extremely impressive. But you do really important work, and that work is in three main focuses: defense, space solutions, and of course, Starlab, which we just talked a bit about. Can you just give us, because I'm genuinely fascinated, can you just give us a sense of the other projects? Like, you go to work and you're working on how do you help build a new space station? Like, that's pretty wild. Very different than all of our jobs down here on Earth. What other things are you working on that you can share?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for the question. So one of the cool things back on space here for a moment is we're doing about half of the commercial activity that happens on the International Space Station today is our company. So we're managing those missions. They're typically for universities, or, startups might have an experiment they want to run. We actually have our own commercial airlock, private real estate, if you will, on the ISS. So we can run experiments in that. We can actually launch satellites out of that airlock. So that's a great commercial business today. And it's part of the reason we won the contract. to build the replacement. On the national security and defense side, you'll love this, Alexa, because we're right in the middle of the Golden Dome initiative, which is, what is Golden Dome? Golden Dome just means layers of a protective onion, for lack of a better word. At the outermost layer, the most important layer for the U.S. and its allies is what's called Next Generation Interceptor. That is for nuclear-tipped hypersonic missiles from Russia, North Korea, and China. And that's a no-fail mission, right? If you don't hit those missiles, we lose a city, basically. So we have the core technology that allows those missiles to be more accurate. These are purely defensive. They're not offensive. But think of a bullet hitting a bullet, and it's really important that you have the ability to modulate the propulsion, and our technology allows you to do that. We also have key technology that allows you to navigate. So when something goes into space, GPS doesn't work, obviously. And believe it or not, it's like a sextant from the old days. The way you navigate is you orient yourself with the stars. So these optical navigation systems will
Wow.
pinpoint where it is in three-dimensional space and then allow you to, with precision timing, guide you to the next step. So think of optical navigation and control. And then lastly, a key area we're involved in is laser communication. So actually sending lots of data from space down to Earth. That's typically been in radio waves in the past, um, on K-band. And what we do is we actually build the laser comm terminals where you can put lots of data down in a laser link. And that's really important as we talk about data centers in space and things like that. Comms, optical communications is really, really, really important. So that's another key technology that we're focused on.
Dylan, I'm trying to decide where I wanted to go next because there's so many questions I want to ask. First, I just want to ask a really simple question, which is, from your point of view, what is the purpose of this future space station that's going to go up? And I ask this from like a practical point of view, which is, it's kind of wild to think that there's been a space station that is obviously being deprecated in 2030 into the ocean. The fact that that technology even lasts 30 years is kind of astounding. Um, but what is the purpose of this future space station that you are Starlab that you're helping put in place? And in so many ways, we're going through um, the single biggest transition of upgrade of space infrastructure in 30 years. But what's just like to ask the basic question, what's the purpose of a space station?
Yeah. So I think a few fold. One is geopolitical. So we need a place to go, right, for humans to actually have an outpost, have international cooperation. China just put a brand new space station in orbit in 2 years, and there is this big, East versus West, China versus U.S. geopolitical issue, which has been there for a long time. But the issue is, where do the Gulf states go? Where does South America go? Where does India go? And so I think it's really important, and it's part of the reason Starlab brought on these international partners. It's really important that we have beacons of expressions of our value system, for lack of a better word. I think that's really important. All the astronauts on the Chinese space station are active duty military. This is a military outpost. Ours is a commercial endeavor that's focused on research and development. So I think geopolitical is one. Second, as I mentioned, microgravity is this magic laboratory. And so drug formulations, protein folding, growing perfect crystals, all of these things have real impact to our ability to do research and then ultimately replicate that here on Earth. If you grow a perfect crystal in space, you can actually bring it down to Earth and grow a larger perfect crystal around it. So think of this as a seed that can be commercially expanded here on Earth. So that's really important. Training astronauts. So NASA will have 4 astronauts on our station at any given time. We'll also have other international astronauts. There are a lot of countries that want to mint sovereign astronauts, not only because it gets their populace excited, but it's an expression of their sovereignty, of their ambitions in space as well. So I think that's really important. And then lastly, to be a gateway to where we go next, right? We're going back to the moon. When we go back to the moon, we'll go back to stay. So a lot of these technologies that we develop for the space station are relevant to the moon and then ultimately relevant to Mars as well. So that's really what the space stations are focused on. And by the way, it's a great deal for the government too. The International Space Station, round numbers, is it's the most complicated thing humans have ever built. About $450 billion, roughly.
Wow. Wow.
Um, in our S1, we disclosed that we're around 3 billion, and ours has 100% of the laboratory space that the ISS has. So
Wow.
obviously, a big difference in cost between the two.
Wow. One of the things, Mark Kelly, astronaut Mark Kelly, now Senator Mark Kelly, once said to me was, he was like, if driving a car, is a complicated thing. He's like, imagine that times 100. That's driving a spaceship. And it like was a really simple way for me to think about like anything that we do here is hard. Anything
Mm.
that we do up there is 100x more, complicated on sort of the simplest level. Um, and that always stuck with me. So when you talk about things like growing perfect crystals, I'm like, it's not that easy to do in space with no gravity, right? It's
Oh,
just everything is more complicated. I want to shift a little bit, Dylan, to your predictions. As an investor, as someone who runs Inspired Capital, we get to look at big, inspired ideas all day long. um, Space is just getting more interesting, and I've noticed I've personally taken many, many more pitches
mhm.
around space, the future of space. What are your predictions as someone who's, you're probably every day walking into, I always say I walk into Inspired every morning, pretending it's 2035. That's kind of my job to like live a decade ahead. You're probably walking in 2040, um, thinking about the future in a really different way. What's obvious to you about how space is transitioning right now, both practically and sort of hypothetically?
Yeah. So now that we've had the elevator built, right? So here's the analogy I use, Alexa. You live in New York, I know. So in 1915, I'll pick a date, pre-World War I, but not by much, right? World War One was just getting started. There were probably 5 or 6 buildings in New York above 10 stories, and the tallest building was probably 15. And you ask yourself, well, why was that? Did we not know how to build tall buildings? And the answer is actually we did know how to build tall buildings. The issue was we hadn't commercialized the elevator, and nobody wanted, in fact, the most expensive real estate was not the penthouse, it was the garden apartment, right? And all the inexpensive was higher up in the building. So commercializing the elevator and making that inexpensive and making that safe um, added that third dimension to the skyline in New York. And of course, right after the Chicago fire, Chicago rebuilt with skyscrapers, and the rest is history. So think of us as having built the elevator. You've got to credit Elon. I know he's controversial in a lot of circles, but we have reliable, inexpensive launch to orbit. We reland boosters now, and of course, Jeff and his company, Blue Origin, just did that
I saw
uh,
that. Yep.
with their orbital rocket. The New Shepard, which I took on my suborbital flight, that booster already was relanding and being used. In fact, I think the one we launched onto space had been used 4 times. But that's different than an orbital rocket, right? That's a much more difficult thing to do. So now we have 2 companies that have reusable orbital rocketry. That completely changes the game. So just to give people a sense, a bottle of water, which is almost by a 16-ounce bottle of water, which is kind of by definition a pound, to orbit on the space shuttle was $100,000. $100,000 a pound. We're now pre-Starship, which is the next generation rocket that Elon's working on, SpaceX is working on. We're at around 800 a pound, 1,000 a pound, depending on what the payload is. And then with Starship, we're going to 200 a pound and maybe lower. So this is a really extraordinary development. So what does that mean? Well, now it means a lot of business plans close. We can get more hardware to orbit. In fact, more satellites were launched in the last 12 months than the entire history of the world to this point put together, right? Now, a lot of those are Starlink. They're Starlink because Elon controls the Falcon program. But Jeff and Amazon are building their own satellite constellation called, I think they just renamed it to Amazon Leo. It was called Kuiper before. So all these different business plans now close. So lots and lots and lots of hardware are being launched to space. Uh, Lots of startups are built around this. Lots of data being generated. So back to kind of putting your investor hat on, I think anything with ones and zeros, um, one of the things we're focused on with Palantir as a partner is this notion of doing edge computing. So rather than collect a bunch of data in space, transmit it back down to space, put it in the cloud, machine learn it, put an AI on it, and send the answer to the customer, why wouldn't you just build that technology stack where the satellite is collecting data, and then you're just transmitting the answer to the customer? So that whole technology stack is being worked on. So I think there's a massive, massive, massive data play. And here's the way I think about it. Um, we have roughly a $75 trillion global economy. If you had perfect real-time information about the Earth, by virtue of having satellites in orbit measuring our economy, right? Measuring the power grid, measuring boats that might be clogged at the Panama Canal in 2 weeks, and you know that because you forecasted everything. If you can make the global economy 5% more efficient, which I think is a pretty easy thing to do with this information network, that's $3.5 trillion of value, right? So when you think about these constellations, think of them as data layers that feed into an overall information paradigm that allows better decisions to be made. And of course, I'm not even factoring in AI. I'm just talking basic data collection and machine learning. You put AI on that, and who knows where it goes from there. So I think space is a fascinating, and here's just final thing I'll say. Think of space as the eighth continent, right? A lot of people think of the space industry. Well,
Wow.
we
Wow.
don't, yeah, we don't say the China industry, right? We don't say the China industry because China is a domain, it's a place. So think of space as a domain. And of course, it has impacts to these other seven continents here on Earth, but think of it as the eighth continent.
Dylan, that's a really interesting shift. I really like it said that way. I want to quickly pull back. You're talking about just like incredibly improved data computing. What does that mean for people? Like, just give us a few uh, things that make it that tangible. What could that mean for us here down on Earth?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, climate data is one. I mean, I think everyone's recognizing that better climate data matters. So this would be forecasting fires and hurricanes and all that. But, here's just a practical one. Let's say you're a trader and you want to put a trade on, should I buy Costco? Is it a good Christmas season? Well, with machine vision and satellites, you can do the parking counts in every Costco in America and see how many cars are in the parking lot on any given day and have your little algorithm say, well, that's 2% better than it was last year. And you can put your trade on based upon that information. That's push of the button, right? So, and think of all the different things, whatever industry you're in. And, I talked to a group of CEOs at the Wall Street Journal recently, Wall Street Journal CEO Council, which I'm a member of. And I said, look, everyone in this room is in the space industry. You just don't know it yet because every industry is going to be disrupted or facilitated or accelerated by space. And so in everyday experience, just think about, what it is space-based assets could illuminate and assume that that's real time. Assume someone's building it because they are. And yeah, so I mean, to me, it's a really, really fascinating thought experiment to say perfect real time information about the Earth. That's happening. It's being built right now.
That's amazing. So effectively, perfect real time information about the Earth that you can use in real time,
That's right.
despite it being in space. What are some of the things that you're worried about? Given that you're at the bleeding edge of thinking about our future, what keeps you up at night when you think about this future?
Well, you know, my vision for space is very Pollyannish. It's very Star Trek. Let's all get along. Let's be better humans. But, my goal in life, get Starlab built, and let's have a G7 meeting up there. Let's have a National Security Council meeting up there. I think you would get a different outcome. I really do if people had that perspective. So that's kind of my passion. The reality is, there's a military posture in space. We have a space force now. We have a space force in reaction to other threats that other countries are projecting. So I do worry about the militarization of space. And, I have a thought experiment I ask audiences sometimes when I speak to them is, the future, here's how the way I frame it. I said, the future of humanity in space will be determined by the answer to a single question. And that question is, what will happen first? The first human born in space or the first combat fatality in space? And I think that in many respects will define what humanity's future in space is, right? And so obviously I'm working towards the former and not the latter, but you know, a lot of our issues here on Earth are projected into space, whether we like it or not. And so I think we've really, and so am I worried about it? Yes. But I also think, as you and I've talked about earlier in the conversation, you can't just sit back and say, okay, well, that's someone else's problem. It's like, no, I'm going to help shape that. I'm going to help talk about it. I'm going to help people understand the potential for space to be good and bad. And you have to be actively involved in helping people understand this, I think. And I'm optimistic that we'll have a human born in space before we have a war in space.
That's amazing. That's such a nice, simple thought experiment of how to think about how do we show up in space. Uh, Dylan, question I have to ask because you have been such a prolific angel investor and investor in I think it's more than 50 companies, and many of those touch outer space and space. Um, what other innovations are you seeing that maybe Voyager doesn't necessarily touch, but that you're paying a lot of attention to because they're profound? And just to kind of summarize what you've said, which is we now have the elevator to get up and down to space. That's going to get cheaper and faster and easier. We have more satellites than ever. The data up there is coming back down in real time, um, and it's the eighth continent. It's not this very far away world that we don't get to go to often, and that you made it very real. What other innovations are you seeing or have you invested in that are worth giving a shout out to?
Yeah, I think quantum is becoming realer. Qubits, believe it or not, appear to be more stable.
Dylan, I just did a year-long thesis on quantum, so
Uh,
I'm like, you've got a good audience here.
I love it. Well, as you may know from your research, qubits are actually appear to be more stable in microgravity than here on Earth because for obvious reasons, right? Um, so quantum timing in space is a really important thing. Back to positioning yourself in space, timing and having a precision quantum clock is really important. Post quantum encryption is a big deal.
Yep.
And as I'm sure you studied as well. And so that's being worked on, quantum keys, things like that, quantum handshakes. So that's a big thing. The other thing, it's not really leaning into the future as much as you would think, but it's important, which is a lot of helium-3 is on the moon. And of course, we're running out of helium-3 here on Earth. If fusion works, which I think we all think it will eventually, we're going to need more helium-3. There's a ton of helium-3 on the or on the moon, literally and figuratively.
The former president of Blue Origin is working on this project.
Yes, Rob, I know him well. Yeah, no, and it's an important. And by the way, a teacup of helium-3 would power LA for a year. So
Wow.
you don't need much of it, but we need more than what we have. We think. So these are some of the things I'm interested in. Deep space, of course. I mean, Elon's really focused on Mars. I think Mars will happen probably first with humanoid robots before humans, but that's coming down the pike. And so we've got a big human factors. Here's an interesting thing to think about, Alexa. Do you focus on making humans immune to radiation, which is the big issue in space, with technology to protect us, or do you hack your biology and make your biology more radiation resistant, right? So
Wow.
it's interesting. The longevity community, I know this is like a lot of this is like frontier tech convergence, but the longevity community and the space community are uh, very aligned on a lot of these things. Because if you want to do deep space, you've got to figure out how to live longer or put people under stasis or, hack your biology in some way. Um, so I find all these things fascinating, but these are some of the topics that are a little bit on the edge of the industry right now.
Dylan, you just first of all, and like, what's fun for me is what's casually rolling off your tongue, which is you're like, well, the first humanoid will go to Mars and maybe we make ourselves radiation resistant. And I'm like, those
Right.
are two wildly big ideas separately. And you think of them as everyday
Mhm.
course of potential action, which is so interesting. Um, Dylan, I want to talk to you for another 5 hours. I'm going to force you to get a meal with me next time you come through New York City. I want to just end on a few quick fire rounds because there's something about all of this that is so clear to me, which is just who you are, which is a very purposefully focused leader who's focused on glowing other human beings in their life rather than collecting your own glory. That's very clear. And I would love just to get a sense of a few things that have helped you get there. And so I'm going to ask a few questions. The first is there a motto or a saying that you kind of live by that is sort of burned into your soul?
Less talk, more do.
Yeah, it's a good one. Is there a book that you read that you want to pay it forward to people? And it doesn't have to be a business book, just a book that kind of changed your life in some way.
For sure. Yeah. The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch.
The Last Lecture. I'm going to pick that one up. I have not read that one. The Last
Or
Lecture.
you have an option to watch the YouTube lecture itself. So
Oh,
yeah.
I will be watching that today. The Last Lecture. I will find it. Everybody out there, make sure you find it too. Um, what is one space fact that kind of has blown your mind?
Stick with me on this. If you took something the size of the space shuttle and you wanted to go to the next star system, Alpha Centauri, and you had 10,000 years to do it, the amount of rocket fuel you would need would weigh more than the mass of the universe. So what that shows you is how inefficient chemical rockets are,
Wow.
right? Yeah, chemical rockets are the most inefficient, but it's the only thing we have at this point until nuclear or something else comes along. But that's one fact that just blows my mind.
That's wild. Um, what is one lesson that you hope your daughters take from your journey to outer space?
Follow your passion. I remember talking to my youngest daughter about this. She was very nervous. She's like, you could die. And I said, well, Morgan, everyone dies. Very few people actually live passionately their life. So hopefully they took that away.
That's a pretty good one, Dylan. That's a pretty great one. Which maybe we'll end on this one, which is what is your boldest, wildest hope or innovation that you're like paying attention to see if it happens in your lifetime for outer space? Your biggest, most ambitious thought.
I'm going to focus on a fundamental one, back to what I said earlier. I want to make sure humans can live and work in space and ultimately reproduce in space. So I'm going to say the first human born in space. I'm focused on that, creating the infrastructure and things that allow that to happen.
First of all, what a concrete and clear one. And oh my goodness, I'm rooting for you.
Thank you.
Last thing I just have to say, Dylan, that I will take away and I will never forget, which is that your heart rate was 56 as you were being catapulted off our planet. Um, that says a lot about who you are and how deeply excited and actually calmed by that. I can promise you I would not have been 56. But I just can't thank you enough for what you're doing on behalf of humanity. It's very clear that you are going to work and showing up every day to allow us to have a better world. And I'm just so grateful we have the Henry Crown Fellowship in common, and what a link that is for both of us. But just we're rooting for you on every level. Thank you so much, Dylan.
Thank you so much, Alexa. Love the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for tuning in today. If you enjoyed the episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and we'll be back